as a result, we revamped our entire hiring process. This is our 130th year of providing quality education to our Pasco community. And our theme this year is honoring the past, celebrating the present, and preparing for the future. And as educators, we deal with the future every day. So today, Michelle Whitney, who is Executive Director of Teaching and Learning, who was Director of HR when we revamped our process, is here to share about that. And one of our bilingual teachers at Virgie Robinson Elementary, Jose Cruz, will share with you from the teacher perspective. I get to start out by sharing with you the challenges. But before I get into that story, I'd like to share with you a couple of student stories to provide a context for why we choose what we choose to do. And some of you who were with us yesterday, we carry tissue with us a lot because you heard the stories, and we have 17,000 stories just like that, and that's what moves us. So I'm in charge of two things, talking and clicking. I want to tell you about Ignacio Bayardo. He and Eric Whitemarsh and Steve Rowley. Ignacio came to us as a kindergartner who didn't speak any English. He was the first in his family to be born in the United States. Until 5th grade, he was in a bilingual classroom, and I'll describe that in a minute. He was smart and an avid student, but he also saw school as his safe haven, as do many of our students. His family moved around quite a bit, and he went to 4 elementary schools in Pasco alone. When he was a 7th grader, he had a teacher named Mr. Whitemarsh at Stevens Middle School. Ignacio had always been interested in how and why things worked, and Mr. Whitemarsh was able to connect Ignacio's passion to the work being done in his science and math classroom. He was also that important adult in Ignacio's life, and he was the person Ignacio first expressed his desire to possibly attend an Ivy League school when he was a 7th grader. Ignacio faced lots of obstacles, but Mr. Whitemarsh was always at his side, convincing him he could make it and achieve his goal. And in 8th grade, he and his family had to move to Mexico under very difficult circumstances. He was deflated and doubted his goal. And while in Mexico for 2 years, he became determined to return home to Pasco so he could work toward going to an Ivy League school. And by 10th grade, he was back here alone as a 15-year-old and enrolled in Mr. Rowley's high school class, English class at Pasco High. The teacher immediately recognized Ignacio's potential and took him under his wing. They worked on his academic English because after 2 years in Mexico, he was in school, but his English had suffered. He got him involved in National Honor Society, and Ignacio became a student leader. And Mr. Rowley convinced Ignacio that he should apply to be a student representative on the Pasco School Board, something Ignacio would never have considered himself. He actually served as our student representative from Pasco High his senior year. And that experience alone allowed him to travel, to interact with legislators, and speak at WASDA conferences and open up his world. And Mr. Rowley really believed in this kid, and it made a difference to Ignacio. That June, Ignacio graduated, the first person in his family to graduate from high school headed to college as a recipient of the Gates Millennium Scholarship, which he will use to cover his education through his PhD because he's committed to a degree in a doctorate in bioengineering. However, he doesn't need a penny of that for his undergraduate work because Harvard gave him a full ride scholarship. And he's just finished his sophomore year, and he just emailed me last week. And on his graduation day, when I was driving him back to where he was staying, I said, Ignacio, I'm really worried about you being alone in such a different culture back east at Harvard. And he goes, Sandra, I'm alone here, and I have learned the skills to be able to succeed back there. And I said, you're right, Ignacio, I won't worry about you anymore. So I want, Maria's going to pass out some of the things. Ignacio, when he left, had made a spontaneous thank you to our school board. And I can't even tell you about it because I need a whole ream of Kleenex. But these are his words in terms of his experience in our school system. And as he left, he said, I hope Ovidio has the same advantage. Ovidio Castillo is a senior this year at Tijuana High School and has had life experiences that none of us ever want to have, no matter how old we are. He's come between his mother and his older brother who was trying to harm her. He's opened the door to his apartment with a gun in his face. He's been homeless. He is currently working full-time. He is responsible for paying the rent and providing food on the table for him, for his mother and him. He will tell you that he was making very bad choices as a middle school student, and I know his teachers and the principal would agree. But he had a wake-up call at the end of his 8th grade year, and he made the decision to turn his life around. And with the support of his teachers and counselors at Ochoa Middle School and at Chihuahua High School, and the guidance, just like Ignacio had, he has actually, last year as a student board rep, he was a keynote speaker to InvestEd's 50th anniversary session in Seattle, and he actually had people from Microsoft and Boeing come up and giving him $100 bills because Ovidio was one of our teenagers who started a nonprofit organization in one of our poorest neighborhoods, where we have about 350 school-age children in what was a rundown labor camp 35 years ago when I used to do home visits in those trailers. He grew up there, he had no positive role models, and so he and his teenage colleagues said, we're going to change the face of our community, and we're going to become those role models that we never had. So they formed an organization called Ambassadors of Lakeview Achieving Success. The acronym is ALAS. Anyone know what ALAS means in Spanish? It means wings. So they want to be the wings for the children that are younger than them so that by the time they get out of high school, they have the wings to fly on their own. And Jose is going to talk a little bit about that because he's been involved with that. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about Daphne Gallegos. I'm talking about these kids because these are kids I personally know and have a relationship with. It's hard to become a superintendent and be responsible for 17,000 kids without having your own kids. So these are kind of my kids. Daphne is one of our current board reps. Her mother has an incurable illness, and for years she was unable to be diagnosed. She went from doctor to doctor to doctor. And Daphne got tired of seeing her mother in pain, and so she decided to do her own research. So she spent about 18 months researching, and she found a very rare autoimmune disease that she thought matched her mother's symptoms. So she went with her mom to the doctor and said, what do you think about this? And sure enough, they ran the tests, and after about 3 years, they finally diagnosed her with Daphne's own research. Daphne just was notified last week that she received the Gates Millennium Scholarship and told me last night she's going to use it to start at Whitman, and she plans to go to the University of Washington Medical School to do some work in autoimmune diseases. So that's why we do what we do. And those of you who were with us yesterday remember Myra's story at Pasco High and Miranda's story at Stevens. So everyone has a story like that. So I want to share a little bit about who we are demographically. We are not a diverse district. We're majority Latino. And you can see how Pasco's demographics compare with the state of Washington's. And these demographics, as you all know, are the ones that really dictate our choices and what we do and the teachers we need to hire. One of our biggest challenges, and I'm gonna, at the risk of, I'm gonna just say, paying extra money for teachers to teach at Virgie Robinson School may not get us the teachers we need there. Because that is not the reason we want our teachers to work with our kids at Virgie Robinson. We want someone who has the right educational disposition, and there's a body of research out there right now. And there are several definitions, but our definition is, it's not just the teachers who are highly qualified according to the feds, because some highly qualified teachers, capital H, capital Q, are not highly qualified. And some who cannot get the highly qualified designation, I would want to teach my children. So those kinds of measures do not get at what we need in our highest need schools. We need to find the teachers, we're defining it as a heart. If I'm in front of a candidate and I tell Ignacio, Daphne, and Ovidio's story and I can't get an emotional reaction out of them, they do not belong as a teacher in Pasco. So we want people to choose to work in our highest need schools based on the moral imperative that they hold in their hearts. Now our challenge is how do we figure that out? The other thing we have is a late exit transitional bilingual model in which we use the child's primary language. And so we need teachers who are not just bilingual, but fully biliterate, because we teach literacy in all the subjects in their primary language. We have that in Spanish and Russian right now. We've had it before in Vietnamese and Laotian. And Jose is one of our teachers in that program. So it looks like, so that uses the child's primary language, and it's transition. So 90% of the day at kindergarten is spent in the child's primary language, 10% in English. And that moves less time in the student's primary language by middle school and more time in English. That's the transitional part. Now, what I want to say is when I started back in Pasco, I was a migrant resource room teacher, and I taught in a program that I was a pull-out program. And what my job was to pull those students out for a few minutes and teach them English, how to read, how to write, and math. Well, I would take most of the children out of the teacher's classroom because that teacher did not speak any Spanish, and she could not interact or communicate with those children. So in the early 90s, we set some new parameters in Pasco for teachers and our ELL kids, which has become our entire basic ed program. We said every single kid in Pasco will be taught all day by a certificated teacher in a language they understand and English if that language is not English. That was our parameter, and those are the parameters we use today. We do not do pull-out ESL or any of those things. We use the child's primary language. So finally, our ELL kids could learn their content because it was taught in a language they understood, and as well as learn academic English. And by the way, it doesn't cost any more to hire a biliterate teacher than an all-English teacher. And that may change based on what Maria was saying, but it doesn't cost any more. So since then, we've been following the late exit transitional bilingual model. And by the way, the research says, depending on what you read, 5 to 10 years for children to become academically proficient in English. And that depends a lot on their life experiences and poverty and that kind of thing. But most of our policies and state laws say that should be done in 3 years. And that's not a reasonable approach. So when we have schools that are like Jose's school, 900 kids in the school, 725 of those kids are ELL kids. It should be no surprise that that school is not going to be passing the state assessments in English. And so what happens when that happens, and this becomes one of our biggest challenges in hiring and retention, is that we believe that those are misguided state and federal policies that end up bashing teachers who serve our kids in our highest need schools. And when we can, based on the results of one test, there are few or no opportunities for these schools and educators to be recognized for their significant work. And I agree with Maria and Julie. It's great to work in Pasco, right? But it can be very difficult and it's very challenging. But I do want to thank the state board for recognizing schools whose ELL students have made. That is a big thumbs up, because it becomes a morale issue. And this overall culture of teacher bashing, for the first time, I've been in Pasco 33 years. We've always had people wanting to work in our highest need schools. We have 9 schools with over 90% free and reduced. For the first time, because of these policies, we are now having a harder time finding principals and teachers who want to go there. Because by definition, by default, they're going to be called failing. Their school's going to be on a list, and they're going to be required to jump through compliance hoops that someone somewhere else thinks is a good idea for kids in Pasco. So we end up spending resources, time and money to comply, doing things that really aren't going to work for our kids. So this is a difficult situation for our best and brightest teachers to want to go to. This bashing is not improving student achievement. It's kind of like a t-shirt I saw on vacation. The beatings won't stop until morale improves. Oh, it's a funny t-shirt, but it's not funny when you're working in those schools, because that's the context right now. And it's really dissuading young people from choosing teaching. I have so many teachers of my age who are telling their children, do not become teachers. So we have a big policy issue that's a big challenge. A little bit about Pasco, additional challenges. We have been growing. We have doubled since 1999. When I came to work here, we had 5,000 kids. We now have over 17,000. We have been hiring an average of 100 teachers a year for the last 15 years. So 48% of our teachers with us today have been with us less than 5 years. We have 1,100 teachers. Teachers coming out. The other issue here is there aren't enough teachers being produced in the state to replace our baby boomers who are retiring. And teachers coming out of our higher ed institutions are not prepared to teach in our 90% poverty schools. They're just not. So when we have 500 teachers who have been with us fewer than 5 years right now, and we basically get them and have to start the training the first day they come to work with us. So it takes time to gear up those folks into great teachers. And the scope is so large for us, it's just almost impossible to keep up. And at this point, it's all locally funded as well. Because of our late exit transitional bilingual program, we need teachers who are fully biliterate and who are endorsed K-8. A 412 ELL endorsement for us is, if that's all the teacher has, it's not helpful, because we cannot put them in a 4th grade classroom. So we need to make sure everybody talks about ELL endorsements, but they're not always appropriate for what a district may need. So that cannot be by default the solution for ELL kids. We have an issue with special ed teachers, especially under the highly qualified laws, who have to serve multiple subjects under an IEP. So these are just a few of our challenges. And then if we do lower class sizes, we don't have room to lower our class sizes. So that's kind of the challenges. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle so she can talk about the happy stuff. Incidentally, I've announced my retirement, and Michelle has been selected